Welcome to Amintro Family, the podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Sammut, and we hope you're enjoying the free online platform and community for family caregivers, be it through the Amintro Family app or amintrofamily.com, because it's all about helping those caring for their aging parents and relatives or friends and to connect and share experiences and access valuable resources. Now, the shared experience is what this podcast is all about. And today we sit down with comedian and actor Gavin Crawford, who's the host of the 7-episode CBC podcast called Let's Not Be Kidding, where he tells us about his mother who had Alzheimer's. And Gavin, what a privilege having you on the show. I really appreciate your being here.
Oh, thanks. Nice to be here, Jeff.
Thanks. It's good to have you. And how was it for you as a comedian to visit an emotional and painful time in your family life using humor in the podcast?
I think that it's the only way I really can deal with anything. So, it wasn't super hard. No, I think one of the reasons why I started to kind of make the podcast was just because I had started sort of keeping a log of just kind of the weird, funny things that, had been happening over the course of, my mom's illness. And then I realized I hadn't been talking about it or telling any of these stories, and I was like, I don't know what I do with this. Do I make it a book? Do I make it a show? I'm not trying to be. I don't want to embarrass her, but also, when you're going through something that you just pile up a bunch of stuff inside, and then CBC came to me and they were like, "Do you want to make a podcast about something?" I was like, "Yeah, maybe." I gave them a bunch of other ideas, and then one just kind of short paragraph about maybe I could talk about this, but I didn't really intend to. But then they were like, yeah, I think that sounds great.
Yeah. Well, and it must have felt good because it gave you this outlet to be able to share all these stories with those that would be seeking that sort of thing. Because I lost my dad to Alzheimer's, and I found talking about him and talking about his illness became very all-consuming leading up to his passing, and even afterwards. It came to a time where it was I like talking about him, and I like talking about what's happened because I want to help people as well, but I just came to a point where it's I don't think I want to talk about this anymore.
Yeah, it's really difficult, I think, while you're going through it, to talk about it. And then when we were doing the podcast, I realized I have so many friends who are also comedians who are also going through this. And if we just sit down and we kind of unfiltered just talk about our experiences, we might be able to just share kind of grief and laughs at the same time. And that, I think, is what made it really special and really helpful to people, because we're kind of just unvarnished talking about, how we feel about stuff, especially filtered through a brain that wants to make things funny, even when they're not.
Yeah.
And you get that brain partly because, when you're growing up, things aren't funny and you use it as a way to cope. So that's kind of how I sort of coped with it, was just not to make a joke about it, but to just let myself be aware of the absurdity of the situation, and also find other people who, would talk about that absurdity. Because that's one of the things is it's very hard to communicate when you're in kind of long grief, because you don't need sympathy really at that particular juncture. What you more need is that hard to find person who's kind of like a sarcastic listener, or just a listener. Someone who doesn't want to fix your problem because it isn't fixable. And it's not fixable, and you've been through trying to find every way to fix it. If it could be fixed, you would be fixing it.
Yeah.
But you're not fixing anything during those times. You're mostly just coping.
That's right.
And that's why talking about it is really, really important, but also really, really difficult. Because you don't want to bring it up, because as soon as someone's like, oh my God, that's so terrible, I'm so sorry, what can I do? Have you tried this? Have you tried this? There's the worst thing you can do if you're a person who's dealing with someone who's caregiving for a person with dementia is try to help them solve anything. They've tried it. They've done it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The best thing you could do is listen, laugh, think, that sounds crazy. Was that insane for you?
Yeah.
and let them be like, yeah. Like,
That's right. And just say whatever you need, let me know. Like, just to know that the other person is there for you as you're a caregiver. If you know that that person is a phone call away or a text away or whatever it might be that they can, whatever way they can help, it's nice to know that they're there to be
yeah, I
able to
mean, and
help
it's
you.
hard to find the person that you're like, do you mind if I just phone you for 5 minutes and just go
Yes.
on a long tear about how I'd like to kill my most loved person in the whole world right now? Um, and don't judge me. Just understand that I'm not going to kill them, but I need to talk about
Yes,
this right now.
that's right. I've got a friend of mine whose mother has Alzheimer's, and I've told him, I said, if you ever just want to call and vent or just talk about what's going on, go ahead. Like, and he's like, okay. But I'm like, I don't think he's far enough along to realize that that actually might be required at some point.
Yeah, I just think I didn't realize it when I first started making the podcast, and then by the time we finished actually making it and put it out into the world, I was very nervous because I was like, I don't know, why would anyone want to listen to this? Um, but then as I get feedback and more people like contact me and say like, hey, thank you for making that podcast because I'm going through it and I can't talk about it, and just hearing other people be like, yeah, this is crazy, and
Yeah.
you know, that was really helpful to me, and it made me feel like I'm not, because you do feel very isolated, I think, while you're going through that with a loved one, even if you have a large family, because every family member reacts differently, and sometimes you're too close to the people, so if you start talking about it with a sibling or something like that, then you both get too sad.
Yeah. But how was it for you to have like family on the podcast?
I mean, it was good in a way. I have five siblings and only one of them is on the podcast.
Yeah.
So that tells you something.
Yeah.
Some of them just couldn't
That's
talk
okay.
about it. Also, my family is very shy. So that you put a microphone in front of them and they just instantly
Yeah.
clam up and back away.
Yeah.
But they are all very funny and in their own way. So, we as a family used kind of jokes and humor to kind of cope our way through that.
Mm. Well, and I mean, someone that was like family to you, your friend Carrie, you grew up with Carrie, and she described your mother, Donna Jean Anderson, your best friend and a character anyway, but she described your mother as cool and hilarious. And you talk about using humor to cope, but I think by the sounds of it, your mother would have been someone that you would have lovingly joked about your whole life.
Yeah, I mean, I always use my mom in comedy, and
Yeah.
she was very funny. She was very dry and very sarcastic. And she had a very kind of like somewhat like dark sense of humor. So, you could joke with her about pretty dark stuff. And she kind of kept that sense of humor. That was one thing you always knew whenever, sometimes with dementia, you're like, are they still there?
Mm-hmm.
But she would have a little kind of look. I call it the let's not be kidding look, because that's what you used to say all the time. And it was just kind of like a little raise of the eyebrow or like a flick of the eyes. And even at the end, if you say something stupid, she would flick her eyes that way, and you'd realize like she was like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's not happening.
There she is.
So yeah, I mean, she was very, it was another thing I think why I wanted to make the podcast too, just because like, as Alzheimer's is tricky because, you're losing someone very slowly as opposed to quite quickly. And they don't kind of, you're not memorializing them in the same way as, suddenly there's all these remembrance of a person, but if the person kind of shades away very slowly, I just remember, I wanted to be like, I need to remember how cool this person, my mom, is and was, and just kind of throw that out there into the world. And also, she was like a helper. My mom was always a helper. She, in any circumstance, if there was a way she could help someone, she would.
Yeah.
And to an extent that we didn't even really realize until like her funeral, when strangers would come up and be like, oh, I don't know if you know, but my mom helped, me get out of a terrible marriage, or like, she
Yeah.
bailed me out of jail, or all these things. And I'm like, well, that does sound like her, but she never mentioned that to us.
How about the stranger that she invited in to have a nap on her couch?
I don't know if she invited that guy in, but our front door was always open and there was always people in and out of our house. And yeah, one day we came down and there was a guy just sleeping on our couch downstairs. And I thought, oh, must be one of my sister's friends. And she thought it was one of my friends. And then all of us eventually realized like it was nobody's friend. It was just a guy who came in to have a nap.
Your mother might have covered him with a blanket.
Probably.
She would have been ill with that illness, with the Alzheimer's. She would have been ill for almost 10 years or so before she passed. So that's a long time to be a caregiver. And I'm sure you would have done it, in conjunction with others in your family, but nevertheless being a caregiver. How was that for you to be a caregiver for a long time? Because my dad, I mean, he was sick for a couple of years and then he passed away. In the grand scheme of things, it wasn't very long.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult thing to go through. But I don't know if there's anything you can really do except sort of recognize that it's difficult and try to find what support that you need. I mean, I think for a long time, you kind of live in a denial place where you don't really know that you're caregiving.
Yeah.
To a certain point. You're just kind of hyper aware and alert of what's going on. But then at a certain point, you're like, okay, this is definitely a 24/7 job. And it really is. It becomes just there's a couple of years probably leading up to when my mom had to finally go into long-term care where she could not be alone. Like she would just leave and start walking to an imaginary home.
Yeah.
And you couldn't really settle her. The most you could do was distract. And then, but it would always kind of circle back to,
yeah,
okay, this has been wonderful, but I've got to go.
Yeah.
And,
you're just buying some time
to do that for, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year it's a hard job.
So
and
what did you do?
It was really hard
yourself?
on my father. That's why I would bring them out to Toronto for like months at a time, just to give him a little bit of a break. And my other siblings would do the same, like just, sort of step in and do that because it's too much for one person.
Yeah. So your father was a primary caregiver?
Yeah, he really was.
So you had to support him.
Yeah. And so I kind of, once we started to figure out what was going on, I really made like a concerted effort to, travel with them as much as I possibly could, like until she couldn't really travel anymore. But, to bring them to Toronto and like say like, hey, why don't you spend like, the month of December here or, spend the summer here, just to kind of spread it around and just have more people to kind of distract her and stuff like that.
Well, Gavin, you mentioned the point of noticing that something was off. Take us back to that time and tell us about 2016, the Eaton Center, and your husband Kyle and his participation in really highlighting that something was off.
Yeah, I mean, we would sort of know little signs, but my mom was always kind of forgetful. Like she would forget to pick us up at school routinely when we were growing. We had a contest growing up, just be like,
really,
who waited at school on the steps the longest before mom remembered.
Well, there were too many of you. It's your fault.
Yeah, there was 5 of us, and we all had different things going on. So I don't really fault her for that. But my mom really liked to shop. She really was a crazy shopper. She could outshop anybody, but. I guess, Christmas of 2015, they had kind of come to stay for a month, and we took my mom down to the Eaton Center, and she didn't like to shop with anybody. So we would usually just say like, okay, we'll meet you at the fountain in an hour or something like that. And then we kind of went away and went and did our own things. But we came back and she was sort of standing basically where we had like kind of parted with her. And she didn't have any bags or anything with her, which wasn't unusual because she didn't usually buy. She liked to browse, but she didn't like to buy. But then my husband said, like, I don't think she went anywhere. And I just sort of brushed it off. And I was like, no, she never buys anything. I'm sure she was fine. But I kind of looked at her face and she looked a little nervous. And it was sort of at that moment, like everything that had happened in the previous sort of year kind of clicked into place. And I was like, oh, I'm in so much denial because I realized, no, she didn't go anywhere. She was too scared. She didn't remember where she was or how money worked at that moment. And she just stayed there waiting for us to come back. And then I felt terrible.
Sure. Of course.
Because we were like, oh my God. But yeah, it was just, it needed, I think, that kind of slight outsider perspective to sort of be like,
yeah,
I know you really want that to be true, but it's
Yeah.
not true.
Yeah.
Like, she didn't just go shopping on her own.
Yeah, my wife was great about that. We have a bit of a similar story in that my partner, my wife, she was noticing stuff and she's like, something's not right. You know, like my parents would go to the doctor. My dad would have a doctor's appointment. My mom would go with him. And I'd ask my mom, how was the doctor's appointment with for dad? Oh, it was fine. It was this. And then it got to a point where my wife was like, okay, either your mom is not telling us everything, not that she's trying to hide anything, but she's not telling us everything, or they have a terrible doctor.
Yeah.
Something's up. So she went to the doctor's appointments with them, and she noticed that something was up, something was wrong, and there was a miscommunication between my mother and myself, and she wasn't relaying everything that was going on with my dad. So if it wasn't for, and it's great because you talk about that outside perspective that Kyle would have, but also he was very close to your mother. He was tight with your mother. So it was a nice blend of both.
Yeah, they got to be very, I mean, we've been together for like 28 years now. So
Yeah.
they had 20 years to get to know each other. Yeah, they were pretty close. And then, then we sort of noticed, and we would go out we took them out to Cape Breton where we have a place, and I would be driving with my mom and she would be talking to me, and then she would suddenly ask me weird, like, so how are your parents? And she's like, do you ever see your mom and dad? And I'd be like, more often than you think. And as I'm driving around trying to figure out, like, sort of who I am in this scenario, because I'm obviously not me.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I could figure out, like, oh, okay, I think I know who she's talking to or where she sort of is in time. But sometimes you don't, and you just have to sort of just kind of roll with it. If she's like, do your parents still have the candy store on Main Street? And you're like, oh yeah, I go in there every once in a while.
How was that for you to do as an improviser?
I mean, eventually fun. It's a very weird, my dad used to get mad at me. We sort of have these arguments, and anyone who's dealing with someone who has Alzheimer's or dementia will know this. You sort of get to that crossroads point where you have a choice of, do you correct them? Do you need to foist your memories onto them? Or are you okay with just living where they are? And believe me, it's a lot more peaceful and a lot less stressful for them if you just kind of meet them where you are.
That's right.
So my dad would always be like, get really frustrated because it hurt his feelings, I think. And he would be like, geez, Donna, you've got 5 kids. What the hell? And, she'd look at him like he was crazy and be like, 5 kids? Me? I don't think so. With this body? No. And so he would get very mad at me when I would just sort of entertain whatever she was talking about. And he'd be like, afterwards, kind of take me aside and be like, why don't lie to her? Yeah. And I'm like, I don't think it's lying, Dad.
It's just living in her world.
Just carrying on a conversation.
Yeah.
Which for me was a lot easier because I'm an improviser and I'm literally trained to carry on an absurd conversation. Like the first rule that you learn is in improvise is don't block somebody by saying, no, that didn't happen. You say, if they're like, I can't believe we're on Mars. You shouldn't say like, no, we're not. This is Earth. In improv, you would be like, yeah. And then I thought there would be less sunlight.
That's right. Yes,
you just go with whatever they're offering to try to build a scene. And that's what I found myself doing with my mom. And then, and then it often would work so much better. Jan Arden said that once too. She says that on the podcast where she would just fight with her mom and fight until one day she just, something was happening. Her mother was seeing some guys on the porch, and instead of fighting with her that there was nobody there, she just said, well, you could think they could pick up a broom.
Yeah.
And her mom just said, yeah. And then that's the end of it. And that was
That's
the
right.
same with my mother a little bit, where,
Yeah.
you don't have to go too deep in the conversation because it's changing all the time. So I would just sort of answer the questions, and then she would stay sort of happy and chatty and calm, rather than feeling like she had made a mistake or getting distressed,
And then get caught in this anxiety loop that's going to
Yeah, and then it's
last.
nerve-wracking because then they're like,
Yeah.
what's going on?
Yeah.
And I would sort of try to put myself in that situation, talking to my father or talking to my other siblings, to be like, hey, like, imagine if you genuinely believed that you didn't know anyone in this room right now. And they were all telling you that they were your family, but your brain was telling you with no question of a doubt that you're 18 and it's not possible for you to have a family. Like, that's
right.
what's happening in her head.
Yeah, that's right.
So why are we bothering? If someone was doing that to you, it would just make you more distressed. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you wouldn't, in your like rational brain, be like, well, I guess all these people are right and I must be crazy. Like, this is the only place. So it puts them in a really disadvantaged and stressful place. I mean, to a point, obviously, you can't be like, yes, go ahead, walk into the river.
Yeah. You got to make sure they're safe. But if you're just,
you can say, don't walk into the river right now because it's too cold and it will be much warmer tomorrow.
yeah, that's exactly. Exactly. How was it though for you as a caregiver of hers, but mostly as her son, for her to mistake you for somebody else and then start telling you about her son, Gavin?
It's distressing. The first time it happens, it was very distressing. I didn't realize how distressing it was until I got to work later that day. She had come down. She was staying with us for a while, and she came down. It was Valentine's Day, and I said, like, "Oh, happy Valentine's Day!" And then she started talking to me and was like, "Oh, well, I suppose you'll be going to the dance." And I was like, I don't know, maybe." And then she used to often sort of think that I was her friend Frank from high school.
Yeah.
I realized, and so she was talking to me and being like, "Well, you must have all kinds of girls after you," and I was like, I think I'm Frank. So then I was like, well, yeah, I guess a few people have asked me, but I was like, but I don't really want to go unless you want to go with me. And then she kind of like was like, well, we'll think about it. So like totally burned me. And then I couldn't wait to get to work to tell that story because I thought, oh, this is hilarious. And I was at work and at Because News, like with my writer's room and my producers, and I was like, oh my God, this morning my mom thought I was like her friend from high school and she asked me to the dance. And I was telling the story and I got to the part where I was like, she started asking me to the dance, and then all of a sudden I just like barf cried. Like out of nowhere, I just started to just completely sob. And I was like, excuse me. And I had to like run to the bathroom. And then I came back and I was like, okay, we're going to pretend that didn't happen.
Really?
And we won't talk about that ever again. But it just came up so suddenly.
Yeah.
That I was like, oh, this is a funny story. And I realized like, oh no, that was like heartbreaking for me.
Yeah.
And then I kind of got used to it, and I'd go back and forth, but it's just kind of a devastating thing because there's a whole world of self identity and self that we tie into other people, and if somebody that you really love or has known you and given birth to you suddenly doesn't know who you are anymore, it really makes you kind of be like unpinned in time.
Yes.
You start to think like, who am I if this person doesn't know who I am?
It's very strange.
Am I still me?
I had my dad over at my house. He was fairly into Alzheimer's by then. Well, clearly by what I'm about to tell you. But I remember standing in my front hallway with him, and he said he was talking to me, and I was like, I don't think he's talking to me, And then he said, yeah, I think this is my son's house, and it's my house. it's me. So he didn't know it was me. I said, yeah, it's pretty nice. He goes, yeah, not bad. You know, and that was the one time I had where he's like talking about me, not knowing that it actually was me. But that,
And then you have to be really careful not to pry.
well,
Because the temptation is so strong to be like, yeah, how's your son doing? Are you proud of him?
He's a big disappointment.
I know. Well, one time my mother said to me, and this is in the podcast, but we were driving to pick up my husband at the airport, and she knew that literally 40 seconds before we were talking. She's like, what time's Kyle's plane coming in? And then, she did a little time shift. And then she was like talking about my siblings or something. And then she said to me, she said, do you know my son Gavin? And I was like, yeah, I know him.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, he lives in Toronto with, get this, a guy.
Oh, really?
And I was like, oh, okay. We're back to here, are we? And then I'm like, well, he's probably pretty happy. She's like, oh, yeah, definitely. I think so. And then she's like, but I mean, don't tell his father. He'll take him out into a field. And
really? Oh, my goodness.
And I was like, oh, man. Yeah, so I learned early on not to pry too deep.
Yes.
My temptation was to be like, as I did say in that phone call, she talked about my other siblings, and I was like, didn't you have one daughter who was kind of, she was like, a bitch? Yeah. And then I was like, yeah, I'm gonna put a pin in this right now.
But I'm gonna put that in my back pocket because that might be handy.
No, I mean, you just like, please, whatever you do, don't weaponize your parents' dementia. It's not worth it.
No, it isn't. Another story, and there's so many. I'd keep you here all day, but there's another story that's a favorite of mine that you tell about your mother, about the time that she replaced her moisturizer with bronzer.
Oh, yeah, that I forgot about, but we had gone to Aruba. Scott Thompson actually reminded me of that because we were talking just about our mothers and the different things they had gone through. But yeah, she did, there was like a month where she just was putting bronzer on her face every day, and then she got like oranger and looked more and more like Donald Trump. And no matter, we threw it out. My sister, threw it out, brought her the right moisturizer. She went immediately back to the store.
Yeah.
And bought the same bronzer, and there was nothing you could do except just sort of accept that in that period she was going to put bronzer on instead of moisturizer. I mean, she had a very golden color, I will say.
If that's what you're going for.
It only extended to her chin and temples, but yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's very hard to watch. It's funny. On one hand, because it's so not my mother to me. My mother was so put together all of her life. I mean, one of the biggest affronts to me, it's the strangest thing. Like, all these sort of terrible things are happening. You're losing a person, and it's very weird what little tiny things stick in your craw. But after she had moved into long-term care, I remember like going in with my sister, and they had her in a pastel hoodie with a teddy bear on it, because, they just put them in what clothes are comfortable or what's kind of on hand. And my mother at that point, it doesn't really care. But
yeah,
to me, it was an incredible affront to like walk in and be like, put this woman in a jewel tone. What is wrong with you?
Yeah.
Like, she's never worn pastel in her life.
This is
like,
out of character.
Someone get this woman a black pashmina immediately. Like, it was so, like, it's such a weird thing to get mad about. But I was just like, I'm like, she would die.
Yeah.
Like, she would be making fun of herself so hard if she like saw herself in this teddy bear sweatshirt. But then instead she's cozy and she's fine. And I have to come to terms with that. Like, today, that's the best sweatshirt. That's the best outfit for the day.
That's right. And maybe it was a moment like that, and maybe there were a number of them, but your mother had often throughout her life been battling something like cancer, like many times in her life, and you'd thought of her as, quote, unkillable. So because she had been sick and recovered so often, was it more difficult for you with her Alzheimer's to come to terms with the fact that she has a disease that she's not going to recover from?
I think so. I think for all of my family, because she had been kind of a health warrior in a weird way. Like she had polio when she was a kid and like managed to like get it right when the vaccine came out. And so,
Wow.
recover from polio, and then had lymphoma a number of times, which are gone and come back, and got a stem cell. And she had a stem cell transplant, and it was like 2 years where we had to be really careful, and she couldn't be around kids or like eat leaf lettuce. But it went away. And so it was very difficult to come to terms with like, this is not something that there's a comeback from. And also my grandmother had Alzheimer's, and I'm pretty sure her father had it too. So I think we were kind of in a level of denial because we knew it was a possibility. And so we spent a longer time pretending it was just like chemo brain or some other side effect of that kind of thing. One of the, it's a very hard part of the podcast, but when I sort of say like to my sister, like, I always felt like mom was kind of unkillable, and she just stops for a second and then she just says like, Gavin, she's like already killed.
Yeah.
Which is like so brutal.
Yes. That moment in the podcast as a listener really kind of stopped time for a second.
Well, it's a hard thing to kind of admit, but at that point, a part of them kind of is, but you still are living with the part of them that isn't. Yeah. And it's a hard thing for your brain to reconcile. Like, how do I have to form a new relationship because the relationship changes, like it's not like the person isn't there anymore, but also you'd be a fool to think the person is fully there. So you have to do a lot of mental gymnastics to kind of figure out how to do it. A very nice caregiving nurse, I was doing a presentation in Vancouver at the Caregivers Association, and we were talking, and she said that she just describes it as a dance. She's like, dementia care and Alzheimer's care is a dance. And sometimes you lead and sometimes you follow, and every day you just do the dance, and that's how you get through it. And I thought that was a really kind of poetic way of saying it.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. How long did it take you to have an instant memory of your mother that was pre-Alzheimer's? Because my dad passed away in 2021. And I'd say it took a good long time for me to think of my dad and not think of him as a patient or as a sick person. It took a while for me to... It takes a while. Yeah, to remember like, oh, I remember my dad when I was 10, he did this. Or, those memories started to come to the front of my brain again.
I mean, I think because for us it was so long, it was kind of a 10-year period.
Yeah.
The timeline to go back to those sort of pre-Alzheimer's memories was pretty short.
Oh, it was shorter. I thought it would be longer.
No, it was weird because we kind of, you know what it's like. It's so all-encompassing. Like they're ill, and your focus has to be on what's now so fully that when she passed, pretty much by about 2 weeks later, when we had the memorial, everyone had a weird, strange, like grief, but also like kind of sense of joy and relief that sort of she had been free, kind of. And also then your brain could go back and allow yourself to have those memories, because you don't want to dwell on those things too much while you're trying to be a caregiver, because it just makes you sort of aware of what's changed or what's lost.
Yeah.
And it's not a helpful place to be in. So you deliberately kind of have to put it at bay.
Yeah.
And then I think it did take probably for me, it was about 2 or 3 months before I would picture, for my first picture of a memory would be like, that mom, like 50-year-old mom or 40-year-old mom,
Yeah.
or whatever. Although I will say, very shortly after that, she would crop up in dreams and
Oh,
be
really?
fine again. And
Oh,
she
yeah.
didn't used to do that when I had Alzheimer's.
Oh,
I mean, when
when she had
she
Alzheimer's.
was in
Yeah.
the throes of it.
Yeah.
But then sometimes now I'll just be like, oh, I had a dream and normal mom was there. I would hate to say normal, but
I
before
know what
mom
you
was
mean.
there,
Pre-Alzheimer's. Yeah.
which is nice in a weird way.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I've dreamt about my dad, and he was bawling me out for something. I'm like, okay, there it is. Good. That makes me feel better.
I know it's like a weird thing. You're like, whatever's happening, whatever crazy thing is happening in this dream, at least you know who I am. So
Yes,
go,
he knows who I
go to
am,
town.
and he's in charge. He's my dad. He's not someone that we're all taking care of or feeling sorry for. Yeah, or you have an episode about hiding the keys, for their own safety. That's something that we did with my dad as well.
Yeah, that's always a hard moment because
It
you're like,
is.
well, there's other people on the road who need to be spared this.
That's right. That's right. You're thinking about everybody else and everybody else's safety as well.
Every time I drive now, all I think is how many people are on the road right now that probably shouldn't be.
True. Yeah.
Because I know how much longer my mom was on the road than she should be. And I've talked to so many people who are like, yeah, like after the 9th time he drove into the oncoming lane, we finally took his keys away.
That's what happened to my dad. That's what happened to my dad.
And then I'm like, oh my God, how many people on the road right now are on like time number 7?
Yes. The last time he drove, and I really do mean it was the last time, my mom was telling me, like when we were like, something's going on. My mom and dad would always go to the same mall, which is about 15 minutes away from their house. And they would go on the same route, go at the same time. Like everything was the same. And he would ask her as they were leaving, where are we going again? And she would say, we're going to the mall. And then they would drive. And then she said to me, she says, but it was the weirdest thing. He kept going in the wrong lane. I said, what do you mean? Like the passing lane, like in the right direction? And she says, no, where the cars are coming in the other direction. So the cars had to swerve around us, but it was okay. We got there. I'm like, okay, he's not driving anymore.
That's the part where you can't believe it, where you're like, what do you mean? But it was okay.
But it was okay. We got there. It was fine. I'm like, and you got in the car again to come back home?
I know. The
and
level
she was telling
of
me this in
tolerance
passing. Like it
that
wasn't
you have,
even.
it's shocking about. Yeah, you're just like, oh dear, this is.
Yeah.
And the excuse, like my mom, what she would be driving to my sister's house and then fully get lost, and I'm like, are you sure? And she'd be like, well, no, they've changed this intersection. Oh, Calgary, there's always so much construction.
Oh, yeah.
And then I'm like, didn't live in Calgary. So I'm like, is that true? And then asked her, I'm like, did they change the intersection down there? She's like, no, that's the same for 30 years.
Yeah. For me, it was my mom that made the excuses. My dad would have no memory of anything. That was the good thing about his illness, or the way he had his illness. He was oblivious. Sounds like your mom was as well, just oblivious to having an illness at all. Some realize it where they go, oh, where was I for the last couple of minutes in that conversation? Whereas he didn't know he was absent.
Yeah, I think my mom went through a period where she was quite frustrated by it. Like, I think she knew because of her mother, but she didn't really tell us. Because she started writing everything down, and then she would call me sometimes and just be like, I can't find my phone book. I think it's in my other person. Just tell me your number again so I can write it down here by the phone. And I'm like, this has been the same number for a good long time. But sure. Yeah. And then once I was home visiting and I saw her notebook that was by the phone, and the numbers were not legible or the right numbers.
Oh, really?
Like, they weren't the numbers that it said Gavin, but then the numbers that she had written down were not the numbers that I had told her.
Oh, wow.
So it's like she was making an effort, but I think she couldn't do it. And then she forgets that she would get very frustrated because she would forget that she forgets things. And then if you reminded her that she had forgot things, she would get quite cross about it.
Yeah.
You
got to find that line, right? You got to find that line.
It's it's an interesting journey for people to go on.
You talked about peeking at her notebook. What about her journal? You read her journal, didn't you?
Well, yeah, some parts of it. Well, my mom kept an extensive diaries and journals and stuff like that. My sister has them all, my one sister, but I read a few things, which was nice to kind of go back and be like, read her talking about me as a 6-year-old, being like, had a big birthday party for Gavin. He did not like it at all. Too many kids, too much noise. He asked me halfway through, can this be over?
Did that clock?
Yeah. He was, well, I mean, I could tell what kind of kid I was going to grow up, what kind of man I was going to grow up to be pretty early on. When she has a note on my 7th birthday where I was very excited because I asked for a birthday party and could we please use the good china?
I don't think that's a far out there ask. I think that's a good ask. I think you were just ahead of your time.
I was very excited. I'm like, but it's, I must be pretty special, but I want you to haul it the good china.
There's audio of your mother in your podcast. How is it? Have you gone back and heard it? Or do you just know it's there?
I have listened to it. I mean, I have other clips that I put in. I deliberately didn't put a lot of audio of my mom into the podcast, partly because she was kind of like not very verbal by the time we started making it.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, I kind of wanted to filter it as much through my experience so that it was, if it was exploitative of anything, it was exploitative of me and not of her.
And the audio I heard was based on your experience.
Yeah. So we were very careful about that. Cause she doesn't have there's a degree of agency that's lost. So I didn't want to, do anything that I thought she would be, not on board with.
Right.
And also, but I mean, I go back and listen to it now and it's nice. It's nice to listen to it. I wish, everyone says this, I wish I had recorded more.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how you keep those things. Yeah. My sister has a number of, my one sister has kept all the voicemails my mother has ever left her. So I can always get her to send. But I do kind of wish, she had a way of leaving messages through her whole life from answering machines on forward that she would just talk to whoever's voice was on the answering machine. So if, for example, Kyle had recorded the outgoing message like, hey, you reached us, we're not home right now. She would always say the same thing. She would always be like, oh, hi, Kyle. It's Gavin's mom. Listen, could you just tell him to give me a call? And then just sort of start having a conversation with the answer machine, like, how are you? Oh, it's a machine. Anyways, okay, well, tell him to give me a call. And she never stopped just talking to the person whose voice it was. So I kind of wish I would have kept one of those, but then I kind of did because it's ingrained into my brain.
Exactly.
I can pull it out in an imitation.
Exactly.
It's weird. It's one of those things where it's like, she's never really that gone because so much of her is my personality anyways. And I can just kind of channel that whenever I want. So
tap into it whenever you want.
And I've been doing it since I was 15 to make fun of her. So now it's nice. She's just there whenever I need her.
Well, it's great to hear a lot about her in your podcast. Again, it's called Let's Not Be Kidding. It's a 7-episode podcast from the CBC and through the CBC. So good on you for doing it at all. And we really appreciate you, Gavin, coming on the show, this show, and talking about the podcast and talking about your caregiving journey and telling us more about your mother. Gavin Crawford, really appreciate this. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right, thank you. There is Gavin Crawford. I'm Jeff Sammut. This has been another episode of Amintro Family, the podcast, which you can hear first on the Amintro Family app, and then wherever you listen to podcasts. We've got a new episode dropping every 2 weeks. Check out amintrofamily.com. And a reminder, we want to hear your stories on the forum, and we can share them here as well on Amintro Family, the podcast.